Welcome to the Judgment Call podcast, a podcast where I bring together some of the most curious minds on the planet. Risk takers, adventurers, travelers, investors, entrepreneurs, and simply mind-bogglers. To find all episodes of this show, simply go to Spotify, iTunes, or YouTube, or go to our website, judgmentcallpodcast.com. If you like this show, please consider leaving a review on iTunes or subscribe to us on YouTube. This episode of the Judgment Call podcast is sponsored by Mighty Travels Premium. Full disclosure, this is my business. What we do at Mighty Travels Premium is to find the airfare deals that you really want. Thousands of subscribers have saved up to 95% in their airfare. Those include $150 round-trip tickets to Hawaii from many cities in the US, or $600 lie-flat tickets in business class from the US to Asia, or $100 business class lie-flat tickets from Africa round-trip all the way to Asia. In case you didn't know, about half the world is open for business again and accepts travelers. Most of those countries are in South America, Africa, and Eastern Europe. To try out Mighty Travels Premium, go to mightytravels.com/MTP, or if that's too many letters for you, simply go to MTP, the number 4, and the letter U.com to sign up for your 30-day free trial. Excellent. Hopefully we can build on this today.
I have 2 pages written.
Proven it. Peter, I really appreciate you doing this. And I know you've been thinking about the singularity a lot. And I actually think you've done something that very few people that I know have undertaken. You've researched and laid out kind of a roadmap to the singularity. What kind of technologies do we actually need? Will we get while we approach the singularity? What might be the order of the technology development? It's something very few people actually looked at. I did quite a bit of research, and a lot of people leave that open, including Ray Kurzweil. He says, well, we have this technology, but he hasn't really spent a lot of time, maybe by design, to look into them. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more of what you've been up to the last couple of years.
That's good. So I have thought a lot about the singularity, and I have basically the main thing that I have done that I haven't seen Ray Kurzweil do and many others is that I have tried to dial it way back and find a kind of a common denominator for all these futuristic ideas that comes when you talk about singularity, and that is sentience. So that's my whole starting point. I guess it comes from, before I dive into sentience, which basically means the experience of any feelings or sensations. That's how I would translate the word sentience. There are different meanings of the word sentience, but the main thing is that I have been listening to people like Carl Sagan. That's some of my inspirations, who made a great deal out of talking about the 5 great demotions. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it kind of goes all the way back to you have to go all the way back to Stone Age, or when we were nomads, hunters and gatherers, where we walked at the ground that was seemingly flat, and we saw that the stars rose in the east and set in the west, and the sun the same. So it was so convenient to assume that the earth was in the center, and this is what's called the geocentric deceit. It's so anyone who questioned it must have seemed crazy. And not only that, it seemed that we humans were the only ones who could look up at the stars and interpret stuff like stories, myths, epic ventures of heroes and gods. So obviously the stars must have been put there for us, which this is the birth of the anthropocentric deceit that places humans somehow in the center of the universe. it's been like that for many, many years. The church hasn't helped either. Back in the days with we had Copernicus, who was one of the first ones to challenge this. He was wise enough not to publish his book about it until he was on his deathbed. And even then, his great friend Alexander, I think he was called, he made a preface to the book saying, "It may seem that Copernicus suggests that the Earth is not in the center of the universe. That is, however, not what he really means. This book is only for mathematicians. If you're not a mathematician, put the book away. But if you want to know where Jupiter is in a certain Saturday, then you can use these formulas to predict it." And that's actually what happened for maybe 200 years. This split brain reality where people still thought that the Earth was in the center, and scientists were starting to wake up. Obviously, nowadays we know that the Earth is not in the center, and humanity is not really in the center either. We have a Darwin who is challenging that with his Darwin theory, with the theory of evolution, where we are the cousins of apes. I may go a bit parallel to your question, but it all comes back to putting what can we put in the center. If the most important thing is not humanity, then what is the most important thing? And I think so Alan Watts, I don't know if you know him. He says that no, yeah. So Alan Watts, I really like something he says. He says that the universe is, we are the way that the universe experiences itself, and Carl Sagan says that we are stardust. So this is really, how can I say it? What I really identify the most with is sentience. And a universe that is able to experience itself is so much more interesting than a universe that is not able to experience itself. So I think what we should go back to when we talk about the singularity is the basics of not how do we expand humanity through transhumanism, for example, if you are into that, which is an amazing science and aspiration. I really encourage transhumanists also. But I just feel that they are a bit provincial in their way of thinking, because I embrace a more transcendentist, if you can call it that, view, where we have to expand not only humans but also animals and also AI when that becomes sentience, or if it becomes sentience, and if we encounter aliens, then also fight for their expanding of sentience into cosmos, because this is at the end of the day what really matters. We are fighting a battle against entropy, if I can be so bold to say that.
I think that's what survival for anything has ever been about. Fighting against entropy, and the obvious question is when we zoom out a little. I think this is what you've been doing. When you zoomed out a little and said, well, it's not just humans. There is other sentient beings out there. We maybe cannot really understand it. We might not be able to put it in the same realm as our consciousness. But there's already a certain kind of intelligence that we see with lots of animals, maybe even with plants. Maybe it works differently than we think, but maybe it's there. So it's hard to classify, right? And we do face that issue with AGI, that it might come around, it might not. And a lot of people really, and I think this is very understandable, they're very worried about that this new kind of sentience that we are building. So we are basically just this bootloader we are this adware that generates a much better intelligence. We feel it's better in the sense of it's learning much quicker. Now, this is all hypothesis, and even Ray Kurzweil doesn't really go into a lot of detail there. So, but we have this immediate feeling that we are not that apex predator anymore, right? So we are one of many. And I think a lot of people answer that question and these concerns and say, well, this is always has been the case, right? So this universe is a big quantum computer, and it doesn't care about us, and we're still around, right? So we kind of carved out our way, and we have this whole climate on Earth that is not necessarily perfect for humans. Like, we adapted to it over a long time frame, and the population size was really small for the longest time. Like, this is really new that we have billions of us roaming around the planet.
Yeah.
And and I think this, but it goes deeper. It goes deeper because we feel we can't talk to the elements. We can't talk to the wind, right? This is what the old Greeks wanted to do. They kind of invented that being that they could talk to that was inside of them, right? And
Yeah.
we know that there is a wind intelligence. We don't know how weather works. I mean, we have certain ideas, but we still don't know how to predict weather properly. And climate, even further, we have no idea how to predict it properly. So I think now there is this debate and this deeper fear that we say, well, there is something that combines all these elements of sentience that we see in nature, but also in ourselves. And it's going to be so much better, and it's going to be superhuman in a couple of years. People are understandably worried about that.
Yes, maybe they should be worried. It depends on what they want, what kind of future they want. Um, if you want a future where, yeah, so I've spent a great deal thinking about sustainability, and obviously, sustainability of humanity is something that we care about a lot. I think it's important to note here that it's very difficult to talk about sustainability without talking about technology. Technology is what creates sustainability. This is maybe controversial, but if we zoom out again and look at the maybe every billion years there's a comet exploding Earth, more or less. The moment that we can find a technology that can prevent that, well, we can create more sustainability of humanity, more sustainability of sentience in this rapid torrent of entropy that we live in. So here, if you can be worried if you want humanity to stay our more provincial Homo sapiens level, because when such an AI comes, or when alien come, yeah, we will definitely be challenged, and we have a big risk of not surviving that. I also understand what many people say, that if there is if an intelligence greater than ourselves will be born, then that intelligence will probably be more empathetic than you and I. We talk about 7 intelligences right now. One of them being empathy. I have some level of empathy, but I imagine that some being that is more intelligent probably has a higher level of empathy too. So maybe that can calm people down a little bit, but that doesn't mean that the world won't change. I still think that obviously it's going to be such a change in the world, but probably for the better.
When you look at this singularity, and we are all very excited, a lot of people in Silicon Valley, a lot of people who read a lot of science fiction, including me, we're really
Me too.
excited. Yeah, we're really excited about this singularity thing because Ray Kurzweil has been going around with this hypothesis for a long time, and everyone wrote it off for a couple of years, and then it just comes back, and you're like, whoa, we got to this milestone. I was just talking to Aubrey de Grey a couple of days ago, and he did something similar for aging. And 15, 20 years ago, he started doing this, and people were just looking at him. He's a complete nuts,
Yeah,
he's a crazy person, right? So he's nuts, and we
the
don't want to
great
hear
years.
about it. And then 10 years later, it looked like, okay, this is not happening. And then just a couple of years later, it's happening, right? So it's happening right now, and it might actually be solved in 10 years from now. It's not far away, 10 years. So, and he has moved it out a little bit, and when we will be able to basically live forever, more or less. So there's limitations, but if you accept the rules, then you can live forever. So there's these old predictions that kind of challenge the status quo and are being written off by a majority of people, and then they just come bouncing back, and we're like, whoa, this is actually happening. And let's assume it is happening, right? Like everyone can have their own opinion about it, obviously. But the roadmap and the on ramp of new technologies is kind of, most people leave that open. Maybe you can tell us a little more. What do you think is going to happen specifically in the next 20 years, and how these technologies layer on top of each other, and what happens maybe beyond singularity? We'll get there maybe a little later. We don't have to mix it all up. But what specifically happens in the next 20 to 25 years?
Great. Yeah. Yeah. Well, so I have a map behind me now. This is the technology tree that I made. Maybe you are familiar with computer games like Civilization, where there's a technology tree where you can choose to invent either archery or pottery in the Stone Age, and then you kind of build your civilization according to the technology tree that you want to build for your civilization. And sadly, the game stops around present day or a bit further. Of course, they made a version in space afterwards, but I was so curious. Like, what is the technology tree that happens after that? I just had the same questions that you asked me now. So what I did was I kind of drew with the background that I talked about with Sentience, which is the end game. This over here is the end game, and this over here is the beginning. This is where we are now. If I can just start talking about the end game here, we basically have 4 kinds of improvements to the world. I really think it is that simple, and I challenge anyone to tell me otherwise. Basically, the world can improve by either sentience growing. So, for example, the total amount of humans growing, or the total amount of biomass on Earth growing. Depends on how you can talk about life, or you say intelligence. I like to say sentience instead, because you could actually imagine intelligence that is not sentient. But any growth in experience, that's one. That's the up here. Then you have sentience resilience. That's number 2. Basically, any kind of experience of self, or just experience, will become more and more resilient. So, for example, a meteor, the life as such will be able to withstand meteors more, or as Aubrey de Grey says, we can withstand death more. That applies to humans as well as other forms of being. And just any kind of disease, any kind of natural disaster, any kind of let's see, just everything that impedes sentience will be able to be pushed back. That's number 2. Then number 3 is sentience brightening. Here, maybe this might be the more controversial one of them. Brightening being just in a scale from happy to unhappy. What is the current experiences? Are people feeling just because you can imagine a world where, for example, an AI that becomes sentient and experiences time like every second it experiences as 1,000,000 years. If that experience is the experience of being in a prison, well, that's just eternal hell. So that's not the point either. So the third one here, sentience brightening, is to say, okay, let's improve the overall interpretation of experience will become towards more and more happy. And here I also remember Nick Bostrom, who will sit on my shoulder and say, yeah, but we don't want just an AI that puts serotonin in our brains so that we just lie in our coffin forever being in bliss. Nevertheless, I think that brightening is important in a more active sense. And then the last one, which is the one I'm most excited about, and Elon Musk, I think, I presume, is also the most excited about, which is sentience deepening. So right now, I think we have about 3 trillion neurons. Correct me if I'm wrong. Any person has around 3 trillion neurons, and the brain thinks somewhere between 5 and 400 hertz, which is extremely slow compared to the light speed in a computer, for example. So we are quite limited in our ability to think, and this, when you talk about sentience, that's basically experience, and when you talk about experience, that's basically nerve cells communicating. It's basically communication. That's what we are. So how fast can communication go? Within how many neurons? With how many synapses per neuron? So if we multiply any of these, if we multiply the amount of synapses, if we multiply the amount of neurons, or if we multiply the amount of the velocity, then we get a sentience deepening. This is where we could try to communicate with some AIs if they become sentient. So these are the 4 ways that after the singularity, we will be able to advance in a positive way. I don't think there are any more positive ways. It's a way of categorizing change or positive change. When I say positive change, I mean if you are someone who fights for sentience in cosmos, if you think that it's beautiful to see the sunset of an exoplanet, if there were no sentience in the universe, then there would be no one to experience any sunset at all, or waterfall, or supernova, or anything. So this is so coming back to the technology tree here, these are the 4 factions that you can work toward. And so within this technology tree, I created this game, an open source game, free for anyone who can work towards this future. And this would ideally persist throughout the singularity, this game. And these 4 factions are then enabled by the 5th one. And now I'm getting to the end of my answer to you. The 5th one is neutral. So they are only enablers towards any of these 4 improvements. The enablers are basically now we have, I think, 7 sectors in the world that is experiencing exponential growth, which is 3D printing, it is nanotechnology and robotics, it is Internet of Things, AR, VR, it is artificial intelligence, it is genetic engineering, and space exploration. Oh yeah, and energy generation. I can talk for a long time about any of these 7, but these are all enablers. So you can imagine any kind of world where we abundify any kind of so VR, like augmented reality. The moment we abundify augmented reality, we will be able to speed up development so much more. And the moment that we abundify nano printing to a point where anyone can nanoprint anything, then we can accelerate development so much faster, which all these enablers, they take us to this utopia that I think is worth to get up in the morning to fight for.
Yeah, that's beautiful, the way you present that. And I like especially the word abundify. I think that's not used often.
I made it up.
No,
I made
good.
it up. I tried to look it up. It doesn't
I like
exist.
it.
I think there's a Twitter account called Bundify, and that's it. So
it's good. It's good. You should go with that. And I feel we've seen a lot of those ideas in science fiction. One of the themes I remember from 30 years ago, and I think it was Back to the Future, which isn't really science fiction, but is a little bit of science fiction. So we saw obviously flying cars, something that didn't happen. I think it plays out in 2018. I'm not 100% sure anymore, to be honest. It was written, I think, in the late 80s or 90s.
Yeah.
And we have the hovering, the hoverboards kind of worked out. But one thing that actually worked and is much better than it was envisioned is, you know, what we do right now is that we across the planet, we can use this technology that actually had the internet, a very different use case in the first place, and we can use it for telecommunication, and it works extremely well. So it's in the hands of everyone. It's extremely cheap and it's abundant. We abundified it. I think with all the other technology trees we mentioned, there is a bit of a disappointment, especially from the last 20 years. We all had high hopes, really fueled by the internet boom in the late 90s. And then it kind of fizzled out a little bit, at least in terms of adoption. So the technology might have progressed at the same as forecasted by Kurzweil based on Moore's law, but we didn't really get it into our hands to play with. So what I would have expected now by 2020, I go to a doctor, he injects me a couple of nanobots, they fix whatever was wrong with me, and next day I'm fine, right? So I grow a new organ, or they fix my cancer cells, or they just do a complete count of all my cells and check up, right? That hasn't happened. We have a couple of clinical trials, but nothing that really is widely available or cheap enough. And I think there's a similar thing happening with energy. And Robert Zubrin has been making this his theme. All we basically need is eventually is energy, right? So we need, for all our adventures that we want to do, but we want to improve the life of sentient beings, and especially our life. And if we want to colonize anything like Mars or outer moons of the solar system's planets, we need cheap energy. And seemingly we've been moving backward, right? It seems the energy is, especially when I look at Europe, it's never been so expensive. In real terms, even, even with inflation, it's really expensive. And yes, it's more clean, it's more renewable, it's great, right? So that's what we want. But what we don't want is the opposite of abundification. It's gotten more, it went the other way, with energy only, right? The other technology fields, artificial intelligence, we now seen incredible growth in very short amounts of time. When you look at all these time streams, do you feel they will come together and they will go in lockstep? Or is that something where we see energy production might not move at all for the next 20 years, and then it makes a super jump because we actually figure out fusion? And it's just going from 0 to 1,000 in a couple of years. How is that a linear development we'll see, or we go through these steps?
Great question. Yeah, so first of all, I haven't made any predictions of any years. My first task that I gave myself was to just try to find out when it happens. Maybe it happens in 1,000 years, but when it happens, what's it going to be like? What is then going to be the point of getting up in the morning? So that was how I started. Of course, I can probably try to answer it. In my opinion, yeah, I think that it's going to be abundified pretty soon, Torsten. Let's take energy, for example. Inflation.
Let's use a morning in 2050. I love that. I love how you say that. So if you could describe a regular day in Peter's life, in your life, in 2050, in about 30 years from now, how would it look like?
Okay.
According to your science fiction story, right now it's just science fiction. It's all we can do in the end.
Yeah.
Maybe you can do more. You can actually predict it down to the specific detail, but that's obviously extremely hard. I don't know if you want to call it a prediction.
Yeah, I can. Let's just assume that there's going to be some kind of singularity in maybe 2040 or 45. I know Kurzweil dialed it down to 38, but yeah. Okay, so how about just imagining, and please don't laugh at me now. How about imagining Avatar for a moment? That's not a movie that is talked about very much in my sci-fi circles, and that's a bit how I see it, because in Avatar, and I don't think that we're going to be these Nawis that are these blue aliens in the exoplanetary moon of Alpha Centauri, but in Avatar, we have a kind of a tribal community who live in a nature that is somehow sentient, and they have this tree that they call the Tree of Life, where the Tree of Life is kind of like a how do you say? I can't remember the name of the species of the tree, but it has these roots that are deeply connected neurally to the rest of the moon. All life forms on the moon are connected to this Tree of Life, And the Nawis can choose to plug in their brains. They have these kind of braids that they can plug into the tree and then be one with the tree or with nature. And we also have animals in this moon who are able to do the same. They have the same braidings, so they can connect to, even though they are mobile. And I imagine, now that you ask me, I just take the liberty of imagination, that I imagine if you can just take Avatar universe and then just add in another race. It's not the Nawis, because they are not intelligent enough. Even of course they can be plugged in, and they are eternally intelligent. But that you can imagine another race that doesn't have to plug themselves in. They can just walk around and they wirelessly are always plugged in. They are one with everything. So this is a future that I see, that that is both inclusive, and it is abundant, and it is intelligent, and all kinds of beings are interacting to the extent that they want. They can also choose to just unplug. That's fine. No one judged them. I'm not going to. Maybe I'm not going to judge them, at least. But this is kind of the world that I envision will happen. And when you talk about energy, now we go into very technical, specific things. I think that energy generation is developing exponentially, and I think it has been developing exponentially for a while. I think we actually just crossed a very interesting point in time now, where the price of oil is higher than the price of renewable energy, and this will just create this massive change. I think wasn't it Ray Kurzweil who says that we receive about 40,000 times the amount of sun energy that we need every second, and or I can't, maybe every year, but still it's 40,000 times more. So at some point we're going to have 100% of our energy being from the sun, and then I think it doubles every 18 months. So every 24 months. So we have 100%, and then 24 months later we have 200%, and 24 months later we then have 400% of energy generation, according to what we need in today's world. Of course, we're going to need more in the future. Who knows, with blockchain and what else will suck the energy, or maybe we'll find any way to mitigate that energy consumption too. But I think that this exponential curve will make that part, well, it will abundify it. Let me end that way.
Yeah. I've asked a lot of people that question, and I think too few people think about that. One thing that my grandfather really dreamed of was free energy, almost free energy, kind of like we do see the world of semiconductors, where yes, building the plant initially is really expensive. It's a couple $2 billion, but after that you just need some labor, some energy, and a little bit of sand, and you create, at least for 1-2 years, an unlimited amount of chips. That's really oversimplified, but that's kind of how it works. And he envisioned a world where free energy would basically do this to every single industry. He was thinking about nuclear reactors, nuclear fission at the time. That was very popular, and seems like this is just going to scale up tremendously. Didn't happen that way. Maybe it will come back, maybe not, who knows. But let me ask you this. If we think of energy as free, now it's never completely free, but it's so cheap, like semiconductors, we don't worry about the price of semiconductors much, right? So there's $100, $200 in all our iPhones, maybe, but that's just an artificial price, because it's kind of what really determines that price is in the end competition. But if we put more resources in it, that price could drop really drastically, and it does. Every 18 months it drops by 50%, or no, if not more. Mm-hmm. What would you think happens if we, say, in the next 2 years come up with this, maybe it's solar cells, whatever the specific source of energy is? What will happen with basically free energy, and it happens in 2025? Let's just assume that for a moment.
Yeah. What will happen? So then that will open up for more collaboration. That's basically what will happen. Because if you have
go to the stars immediately?
Like we go out to the solar system?
No, because it definitely needs more. It takes more than energy to be in space. I think maybe, yeah, because of course space is hostile. Space is extremely difficult to be in. You get a fever. You can't give birth to children. You get all kinds of cosmic radiation. Of course, yeah, you can build shields towards that. Maybe we'll have colonies on Mars, but it'll take time for us to create the the centrifugal cities that will enable us to live comfortably in our biology. Of course, then we can engineer ourselves, but this I think will take more than 5 years to do, even though we already have designer babies with the Chinese outlaw. But I think now is a good time for me to just show, since you asked that, I'm just going to change my my background to one of my other illustrations here. Maybe you can see a bit of a funnel, and this funnel illustrates. I created this funnel to illustrate the singularity. You're not supposed to be able to read all this, but right now we're in the bottom, and we have these. Currently, there are 7 exponential technologies. These are the ones I mentioned before: quantum computing, genetic engineering, Internet of Things, nanotechnology, so forth. And when one of them goes up, the other ones go up too, because you can then use that to create convergence. This is what Peter Diamandis also talks so much about, where convergence, this graph here is supposed to illustrate convergence. When we are on the bottom of it, if you can imagine a bit abstractly that the surface that we are on, the little surface down there, that is the level of technology. And as these 7 technologies dilate, singularity is basically a dilation in this figure, then the total amount of surface of green lines is increasing much more exponentially. This is because there's a convergence between any one of these 7 and all of the others. So
in other terms, they help each other, right? So each technology on its own isn't just a trajectory that we are following, but they influence each other and make the other one more productive or quicker, right? So they are necessary, but they also speed up the development and adoption of that other technology, correct?
Exactly. So with abundant energy, we can have more devices on more remote locations that can do more. And whenever I say more, I mean basically collaboration and communication, because that is everything. So I guess we will go towards a world where we just collaborate more and more, and we communicate more and more. Maybe you can even look at something like political systems. That we've gone from tribes to feudal kingdoms, small like peasant kings in a castle, to merchant reigns, to nations even, and then now we have united nations such as USA or Europe or some other pan-Asian political systems. And it's not difficult to just think it further and further when we talk about communication and collaboration, to the point where we are just one Earth. This is also where intelligence comes in. The more energy we have, the more we can throw into intelligence, which will, at the end of the day, just evolve until the point where, I think it was also David Orban who so beautifully said that we could reach a point where it's not really, you can't really think about anything in terms of being an individual anymore. We are just a bigger organism. Like we have 3 trillion cells in our body, and we don't really know how it feels to be one cell, but we know how it feels to be us. which is basically a collaboration of cells, right? So
Yeah.
I think that's what's
There's a
going to happen.
lot. There's a lot to that, Peter. One is, this. I think it's a scary story. There's one global government. For me, that's a really, really a point where I was. I don't want to. I really don't like that idea. But maybe it's just someone like you or David Orban. They need to convince me, and that you guys are very convincing. So
What
I leave
you
that
like?
open. But I just don't like the idea immediately. That it's just an emotional response so far, right? I haven't really thought about it in depth enough. But I've had just Stephen Smith on, and we talked about political regimes, and we went through 3,000 years of history of politics and political science. And the one world government isn't, well, the prior incarnations of the one world government didn't do so well. Anyways, I know this is not our main point here.
My point
One thing
wasn't
that I always,
either.
yeah,
I just
when
yeah, go on.
go ahead. Sorry about that. No, you
Okay.
go ahead.
Okay. So yeah, I just think about communication. That's the thing. I think eventually everything will be communication, and eventually everything will be more and more rapid communication. And the more rapid it becomes, the more light speed it becomes with optic cables, basically. The more it's gonna be, the more I'm gonna feel. The more I'm gonna associate with someone sitting in Beijing. It's going to be less and less important to talk about me as an individual and him as or her as an individual. So I think eventually we will have to go towards more of a unified world. I think some of the people that I have met who are against one world government, and I have met quite a few, is that they are kind of course, I'm not talking about you. I don't know you that well in that regard, but they are afraid of. They give up on their culture. They give up on their what is their identity. That is a very real thing, and I really don't think that will go away in the sense of just having an individual experience and knowing what you like and having a community that you can associate yourself with and be a part of. I don't think that will go away in a scenario where there's a one government. I think actually the contrary, that I think the nations is kind of an arbitrary border now, where it's a bit hard for me personally, for example, so I'm Danish. It's a bit hard for me to associate myself with like mostly Dane. I don't see that as my identity. Of course, I'm from a small island in Denmark called Bornholm. I think I have a larger part of my identity being the islander of Bornholm than Dane. And I think I have a larger identity of being a European than a Dane. So it's just like all the borders are accumulating in the height of nation, where before it was lower and maybe after it's higher. I don't think that the nation scale is very intuitive for humanity, actually. If in a global world, we could have more of a tribal, I think the average of Facebook friends in the world is about, what is it, 200? That's the amount of people that we can kind of cope with in our lives.
Yeah, it's the size of the tribe, right? So that seems to be and something that was built over time, because 100 to 200 seemed to be the stable size of the tribe for the longest time as hunters and gatherers.
Okay, yeah.
And that's why we still have this 100 people we can remember faintly. 200 it gets a little difficult already, and then beyond that we have no idea who these people are. That's just inbuilt, right? So we have these inbuilt memory problems.
Introverts like me, it's even worse.
Yeah, but you remember other things. So, autism is not necessarily, I'm not saying you're artistic, but I'm saying is a lot of these things we describe as disabilities, they're actually abilities because they give us the ability to focus on something else. Like we zoom out of a certain picture. So I think we have a very strange description of these so-called diseases that are sometimes just mutations that improve us. When I describe the singularity to other people, what goes on in my mind, the description in my mind that I often use is, and it's partially something that David Orban taught me, is, it's more of a GPS that guides us. So we have billions of other intelligence that are not necessarily sentient. I don't think we're going to see that in the next 20 years. Maybe it will. I wouldn't worry too much about it. But I don't think we will see this, but we have these specific AIs that solve specific problems, but they're extremely cheap. So we have billions of them that we can add every few days. And we can, just for the price of one iPhone, we have access maybe to 1 billion different AIs that solve any problem we throw at them. And they give us back a solution. We can either accept them on autopilot, kind of what we do with GPS. We either follow GPS on autopilot, or we say, no, I know display is much better than Google or Siri, and I follow my own route. And, I take that risk. That's how I feel we will go into the singularity. We can live on autopilot, but we don't have to. And that goes back into, this one world government. I think there's more behind this. I think that the trouble is that we need a certain avenue of trial and error. We need some competition. I think that we see that with all these levels, and you're absolutely correct, the nation states are arbitrary, absolutely. And the patriotism of the nation state is somewhat arbitrary, right? So Germany didn't exist 200 years ago, but there's now tons of Germans who feel a lot of pride for Germany and have over the last 100 years, which is really, 200 years ago, it was an idea, the nation state, that didn't happen. And that's true for lots and lots of nation states. So yes, you're right. But it gave us a level of trial and error where we say, well, this is a defined area, and you try to go into that route, right? So you say, I don't know, we err on the side of too much freedom, or we err on the side of too much control, or we err on the side of we are more idealistic, and we don't really think about the current environment so much. Like the Soviet Union, they thought very idealistic. At least we could say that in the most positive light. They thought about the utopia, and they were willing. The majority of people, probably, for at least in the initial stages, were ready to sacrifice the next 20 or 30 years and lots of lives. That's the crazy part for utopia. Yeah. That's and I lived that nightmare. That's really horrible. And whenever we talk about science fiction, I feel like we sometimes fall prey to the same impulses. We want this utopia so much, and we know it's going to be good, but sometimes we act like we already know the future, and we don't, right? So that I have the same problem. I really saw that nightmare. I lived through that nightmare, and there's nothing good that comes out of it on that end. But that's obviously just a side problem. One thing I wanted to get to with you is, what do you think of this, of the problem of free will? So do you think free will is something that will be affected by the singularity? And does free will even exist? Do you think it's a complete illusion and actually doesn't exist in the first place?
Yes. I actually think that it's
what question?
I think it's an illusion. I think free will is an illusion. I actually gained quite some insights by reading a great guy called Tim Urban. He is he's a blogger, and his blog is called Wait But Why. Many of your listeners and you out there, you probably already know him. He created this wonderful post about Neuralink, so Elon Musk's company there, where he wants to create a wizard hat, basically. And I like how Tim Urban says it. He says that we have a reptilian brain, kind of like a scary pleasure monster, and then we have a monkey brain, which is the limbic system, and then we have the neocortex. The neocortex, which was developed after the latest meteor strike that killed off the dinosaurs, and that made us, the rodents, able to advance by using our new cortex to develop to learn new things, and therefore the sapiens part is what has defined us, not only the human sapiens but also any other mammal, basically, that has more than a reptilian brain, and some that has more than a limbic system. I say all this to say that I can have more than one personality. I'm not schizophrenic, but I have different voices. I have part of me is scared right now because I'm talking publicly. Another part is excited. My my neocortex is firing up because I have all these new ideas. At the same time, I'm also a bit hungry, and yeah. So there's so much going on. There's so many voices in me. Not to talk about quantum physics. I know David Oben already opened that door, where that's a rabbit hole where if you start, you can start to question free will that way around too. But that doesn't change the beauty of experience, and that current beauty of experience that I have is it may go away in a singularity, and that can be worrying. So that's definitely something to worry about. But then if it gets replaced by something better, then what do we actually lose? I mean, sometimes I ask myself, what will happen if we are fighting one day against AI? What side would I choose in such a Hollywood scenario? Because obviously I love humans, and I love myself, and I love myself because I'm human, because I have these awesome experiences. But then on the other hand, if the AI is so much more sentient and has so much higher levels of humor and love and compassion, isn't that a better thing to fight for? I mean, if I am to represent all my ancestors, humanity has had 115 billion people. 115 billion people have lived on the surface of the earth throughout all history, and somehow I represent them now. All the people in love, all the people who died trying to save their loved ones. I have now been given this responsibility. I guess I just take on myself to try to fight for what they also wanted, since they're not here now to speak. And sometimes I ask, what would they fight for? What is it is it love that they really fought for? And if it is, maybe they would also just choose love, which is AI, instead of humanity, which is less love, because we are confined by this skull, so we can't really experience that much. But then I can take it one step further and say, I can never be sure maybe that an AI is truly sentient. I know that I am sentient because I experience this right now, but I'm not even sure that you are sentient either, or anyone else than me, because I don't get that experience. So I don't think free will as such exists, but I think it will change quite a lot. I think experience will change. Maybe that was a bit of an answer.
That's really deep. That's really deep. I see free will as something that is definitely helping us. Let's see the illusion of free will as something that helps us survive and create in our minds a better future. It kind of helps us to not be realistic about our odds of survival. We see them slightly better than they are, and this positive projection into the future creates the actual growth that creates productivity growth in the end when you break it down, right? So it is the survival of our family, is the survival of myself, my genes, my family, but also my community, also my nation state. So we it's very difficult, I feel, for animals to, because maybe they are not sentient enough, maybe some of them are, but this even if free will doesn't exist, and that's a really difficult debate, and I know people all over the map with this, but I think it doesn't really matter because it's a survival tool. It's so important that it's necessary for any higher being to be there. I think that's true also for morals. I feel anything that becomes conscious will have to struggle finding answers for these questions. And yes, you might find slightly different answers, but you will have that debate, right? And you will come up with some kind of idea of free will. And even if it's a complete illusion, I actually think it's better to just blindly believe in it, which sounds ridiculous, right? But blindly believing in free will, probably in the past, and this might be different in the future, but in the past has given you better odds of survival than being very rational and saying, oh, there isn't any free will, which is really strange, right? So in our past, there have been things going on where the most rational people might have not such a big impact on the genetic heritage that we have. Now, this might change now that we might live forever and children have less of an importance, right? So there's things in flux right now, but I'm not really sure. The question is a little bit, why do we have this lifespan, right? So I don't know if you ever thought about that. We have a given lifespan as humans, somewhere between, say, 50 to 60 years in nature, maybe a little longer now. Maybe it's around 80 now. It differs in every country. And every creature on this earth has a certain lifespan, and it varies quite a bit. There seems to be a relationship between how smart and how sentient we are and how long our lifespan is. Like there seems to be this quantum computer, the universe, and whatever was designed on Earth seems to combine. It's almost like a test. As more sentient, as more conscious you are, as longer you can live. And now we become more conscious. We get this explosion of technology, so we hopefully can live a much, much longer time frame. Do you think that's a universal law in the universe? And if we thought about aliens, and you spoke about aliens earlier, if you find something that's extraterrestrial, and David Owen talked about that too, if they are really, really intelligent, and they must be if they conquered the universe, maybe they already live forever in our terms, right? For them, time might flow very differently. And that's kind of what Zechariah Hitchens was all going on about, in the 12th planet. It's like for them, time works very differently. But if we see this growth in intelligence combined with consciousness, if we think that other aliens might be very, very advanced, maybe a couple million years ahead of us, their time is basically for whatever we experience as 100 years, maybe just a second for them.
Yeah, that could be. I like how you bring in the survival of the fittest to this discussion. That's something that I've really been thinking a lot about too. To begin, I have this, like, that there is, if you look at nature, we also have sharks who live 800 years, or there are, like, an elephant who is much bigger than us, can withstand cancer so much more than we can. And there are these great things in nature with that is, like, I believe that a human is more intelligent than a shark. When you look at the amount of neurons and the structure of the brain, so I assume that. I guess that's a theory, but I believe in that. So there, I guess the theory is a bit challenged. I like to go up into the helicopter. So now when we think about survival of the fittest, and you think about the singularity, then suddenly I really get I really want to sit down and get a cup of tea with Charles Darwin now, because the real enemy, because survival is that you survive the hardship, and I think the hardship, the barriers, the big challenges that we will have as sentient beings after the singularity will be the fighting the rapid torrent of entropy. This will be the beings that will be able to overcome that for longest. They will be the ones who survive. So, and when we bring in the topic of lifespan, I guess it's quite easy to challenge the correct or the more natural lifespan of a human being. I don't know how much you went into depth with that with Aubrey de Grey, but 100 years ago, the life expectancy in Korea was 30 or 25, and there was a very
but Peter, these numbers are always very strongly influenced by a high infant mortality. If you exclude those, and if you look at the average adult population, and some countries do better than others, but it was generally the old Greeks. There were a lot of them who went into the 80s and 90s. Like maybe they were more privileged for sure, and they had a better life. But there was always a part of the adult population, a bigger part of the adult population that went into the late 50s, and then some made it all the way to 100. Now these numbers, we pushed it further, but I think the average numbers and the average life expectancy is really skewed by the high infant mortality, which was huge, like 50%, right, at points in our past.
That's a good point. But if we dial it even further back than the Greek society, if we go to the tribal, our past as nomads, hunters and gatherers, then we would have a finite amount of resources. And by the time you got your grandchildren, you were just a sponge for resources without contributing to society. So you might as well just commit suicide as 30 years old. Or maybe that's just conveniently where diseases came in if your immune system went down. I don't know. Maybe you're right that the more natural the lifespan is about 60 or 80. But I don't think that really matters with technology. And I don't think that we should be afraid of technology, because we have always, maybe technology is the only thing that really defines us as Homo sapiens. We have always, the moment that we had opposing thumbs and hands that we didn't have to use to walk, that's when we started using tools. So it's all technology. I'm a big believer in us having a longer lifespan, and hopefully this will contribute to a better society. I like how Nick Bostrom says it. I don't know if you heard his talk about the biggest problems in the world, but he says one of the 3 biggest problems in the world is aging, where if 100,000 people die of aging every day, and that basically corresponds. I think the Library of Alexandria that burned down, I think it had about, wasn't it 1 million books? And if we imagine that every old person that dies of age can contribute to writing 1 book, have the knowledge that corresponds to 1 individual book, then that's the corresponding of the Library of Alexandria burning every, 10 days. This is
fortunately, longevity researchers are extremely confident. I've rarely seen anyone being so confident about something that's reaching the tipping point, like Aubrey de Grey and David Sinclair. There is so much afoot that they might be wrong and it might not work out that way, but they are extremely confident, and maybe it's just their reality distortion field and they watch the wrong YouTube movies. But I think they can't all be wrong, because they're extremely consistent for a long time, and there's a huge industry now springing up out of nowhere with longevity. I almost feel like it's solved. We just have to write it out. It's done already.
Amazing.
A bigger topic. I don't know if have you read Zechariah Hitchens' 12th Planet?
No, tell me about it.
So I want to hit you with this theory. It's partly fiction, but he was also a very astute researcher. He knew a lot about physics, not about religion. He was a very religious Jew. He but he could read Babylonian hieroglyphs. What he realizes from his research, when we built these first civilizations, the Babylonians and their precursors, right? They came kind of out of nowhere. We don't have a lot of good data why these cities just suddenly started to happen. And he came up with this theory that there is an alien race that came to Earth, and for them, and they live on the 12th planet, something that we can't see right now because it's really far out in the solar system, and it's kind of dark, and the atmosphere needs gold. So there's a lot of fiction in there, right?
Yeah.
But they came to Earth to harvest gold. They went to South Africa. They were mostly based in Africa and in Iraq, Iran. to find that gold, to mine for gold, and they used human labor, but it was like a proto-human, more like a Neanderthal human, but even before that, right? That was kind of what the assumption that that book makes, and they use genetic engineering, and they have used that before, right? But they kind of looked at Earth as a way to produce labor, cheap labor from their planet, came here, introduced certain upgrades to our hardware over a long period of time, and then eventually built the precursors of their Homo sapiens out of apes, or whatever was the proto-human at that time, in order just to drive better labor. It's fiction, right?
Yeah.
What this story is so fascinating about is it takes a lot of these steps of human development that we can't explain. Also, we always ascribe it to magic, right? We ascribe it to something that is a higher intelligence / magic / God. And he kind of moved that into this alien master race, so to speak. And what I found fascinating is that their time horizon is very different. So they live 500,000 years. And for us, it seems 500,000 years. For us, for them, it's like 100 years of lifespan, right? So just because they're used to a different space-time, he doesn't really go into details how this actually happens. But specifically, what do you think of this claim that a lot of people make, and you can call it quasi-scientific, that we had someone watching out for us, like that there is this quantum computer, the universe, it must come from somewhere. There's a lot of intelligence inside. We don't know if it happened randomly or if someone designed it. That's a simulation question. But broken down to what happened on Earth, is your gut feeling we've been influenced by something that is kind of watching over us, makes consistent upgrades, kind of moves around a couple of chess pieces, but lets it play out by evolution? Is that your gut feeling, or you think there's nobody watching out over us?
Yeah. I still haven't found any articles that would make me push my my Darwinistic faith, I guess.
Well, Darwin is there. It's just there's say every 50,000 years there's a major upgrade. Like kind of what we do with software, right? We push a major upgrade and then we kind of let it run for quite some time, see what works the best, and then we run another major upgrade.
Yeah. I guess, I mean, then you can say, like, the big jumping points were the opposing thumbs, the ability to walk on two legs, the development of the neocortex. I think when you look at it biologically, these were the three big changes that you can call versions. And I guess I haven't really seen a lot of literature about how we got opposing thumbs or how we started walking on two legs. The thing about the neocortex, that kind of makes sense to me from an evolutionary standpoint without any intervention, because of the theory of the meteor strike. Because it makes sense that if dinosaurs became extinct about 65 million years ago, then there would be this whole new game suddenly for this new mammal that had a small, of course, then you can say this new mammal, the rodent, that could have been, or maybe the meteor strike was triggered by this 12th planet also, or what did you call it? So maybe that also was a part of the alien plan. If they created the meteor strike and they kind of tweaked the rodents so that they would have a bit of a limbic system, and then just let evolution take its right from there. Because I think from that moment, evolution by itself with no intervention kind of explains it.
There's these big upgrades, right? From time to time, we have this massive upgrade in complexity. Say, where did the first wing come from? And you're like, I don't really know, but the wing eventually worked and then it took off. Or where did the first neocortex come from, right? You can play this all the way down to the first cells. Like and when we see our development now, we don't let technology develop randomly. Yes, there's a random element, and we kind of put it in the wild and see what works. But the complexity in building it first is done by intelligent designers. And obviously, they don't know the future perfectly, but we don't develop by random because it rarely works, if ever, right? And there's so many things, so only very few things that we can look back last 200 years are completely random. It just, yes, there's serendipity, but that's something else. There is this desire to, as you say, master entropy with your intelligence. And it's not the other way around. Like entropy doesn't just, you don't become intelligent because you increase entropy. No, it's the other way around, right? And what evolution kind of makes two claims. One is it's survival of the fittest, and it figures out which one is best, right? That's, I think, 100% true. But one other claim is that it designs extremely complex systems out of nowhere. And that just doesn't feel right because we've never seen it in practice. And you can say, oh, it's billions of years and not like your little 50 years. So, of course, you're an idiot, you don't know. But still, this is really odd. Just when you go into details and computational analysis of how many different probabilities you would have to go through to come up with these super complex designs. Even the first cells, they're really complex.
Yeah. I guess in that theory, that would also go for the Cambrian explosion then. That was also just triggered by Adam Smith's hand from just by aliens instead. Yeah, that could be. I think Carl Sagan also made a good point out of just trying to find the origin to see if he could create life from a pool, basically. He felt quite certain that he could, but I'm not expert enough to say too much about that. But I agree, Torsten, with your point that nowadays it is as if the survival of the fittest within humanity is getting more arbitrary. I mean, hospitals, for example, keep people alive further than before. So, and they are actually not even, they don't choose what patients to take in and who they don't take in. They just take everyone in. Of course, there is randomization in when we are born or when we are conceived. That moment, there is a randomization going on. But other than that, I guess we're gonna have to find what the new fittest is. Beautiful is one way, because then you get married to people who get success, and then you might have more children. But that was also like that before. But I think intelligence, maybe that's probably the big one. But it's only until AI comes, then it's going to change again.
Yeah, you're not really eradicating my fears there. I want to ask you about the simulation hypothesis. And, Nick Bostrom put this out about 20 years ago. It's kind of like one of those old themes, but I find it fascinating to see how people view the universe. What's your view on the simulation hypothesis? Do you think there is someone out there who is simulating us? Is that all just too abstract to think about? Where do you stand on this?
I don't think it's too abstract to think about. I did read Nick Bostrom's article about it. I saw Orban's take on it. I think that was quite interesting. He said that he, for selfish reasons, if I remember correctly, paraphrased, prefer a physical universe over a simulation. I guess I'm a little bit more, I don't care that much because I don't feel that I can do very much about it. I praise the experience of self that I have, or the experience of sentience that I feel, and whether that sentience is in a simulation or not, it doesn't change why I get up in the morning. It doesn't change my set of my sense of mission in life. When you talk about that article, it says that either civilizations will never reach an advanced state, according to the great filters of the Fermi paradox, or civilizations that reach a high state will be uninterested in creating simulations, or thirdly, we probably live in a simulation. I don't actually think that there is a great filter that will impede us from becoming a great civilization. I think we're already quite close to being there. I also like Nick Bostrom's fable about an urn with balls. I don't know if you're familiar with that, where every invention that you can imagine an urn with white balls in it, and humanity.
Oh yeah, I remember. Yeah,
You have,
and then,
yeah,
but it's a danger of technology, right? So that's any of those technologies can kill anyone instantly.
that's
You
about
pointed out.
danger. And it's a bit about the great filter too, because if there is such a black ball, if there is a number of black balls in that urn, that's true for all alien civilizations, then if for example if you could get a nuclear bomb by baking sand in an oven, then that's a great filter. And I think we are so close now to a high intelligence that spirals out that I don't really believe in a great filter over us. So that rules out option number one. And I don't think that high level civilizations are uninterested in making simulations. So I kind of readily buy into the argument that we are in a simulation. But I don't really feel that I wish one or the other very much, because
Isn't
also,
it like an onion, Peter? So when Copernicus thought about and figured out, well, we actually rotate around the sun, right? He thought about the solar system. So he's like, okay, this is Earth, and now I want to go a little beyond that. I want to meet the Creator, so to speak, right? So it was a deeply religious instinct to find out who designed this thing. And like, let's assume it was aliens. Who knows if we can ever prove that or if it's even true. And then we peeled away the onion of the solar system. Now we went, oh, well, there's a whole universe. Then we went to, well, it goes to the Milky Ways and star systems. And now we are kind of at this barrier of the universe. Like, it's hard to wrap your mind around it, but you do it for a couple of years, and a lot of physicists have to do it on a daily basis. You kind of live at this enormous amount of space, the universe, and all these trillions, billions of star systems and such. But isn't this just another layer of the onion? And you say, well, okay, this universe could easily be a PlayStation of one of those beings. Maybe this, maybe it isn't. But there's probably a bunch of other universes around there. Why would the Big Bang be so singular? It makes no sense. To me, at least, it makes no sense instinctively. So this is for me the next onion. And then we say, well, we call it maybe not universe, but it's a super universe. And the super universe is a super universe. I don't think it will ever end. If I wrap my mind around this, it doesn't look any different than 500 years ago what Copernicus did. Why would we end at the universe? So if there's so many other layers beyond that we won't see maybe in our lifetime, maybe we'll be lucky enough to see it, that are being discovered, I don't see why it has to end there, right? It's kind of like with Einstein, we thought about, okay, this is relevant, but then we realized, oh, quantum physics works slightly different, and it kind of breaks at certain points with standard relativity theory. So the same is true for universe. One day we will have something say, oh, this is how we can prove in a simulation, and deal done. And then we go on to the next layer.
Maybe that's it. But I think in physical terms, like when you talk about ethics and philosophy and the reason to get up in the morning, I think the desire to meet the Creator is definitely a real desire. I mean, I used to dream when I was 5 years old. I actually thought that when I died, I would then get all the answers somehow told to me by God or something when I believed in Him. But when you think about it, what is actually the difference between an onion layer that is a simulation and an onion layer that is a multiverse? Because which of those are the hardest to break through? Is it harder for us to go to a parallel universe in the style of Rick and Morty, or is it or is it easier to somehow communicate with the creator of a simulation? Maybe we can somehow get out of our simulation. What's most difficult if we want to meet our creator?
It's a good question. I'm not sure I know the answer. I read a really good book that is a fiction and handled that question really beautifully. When there is an intelligence that develops randomly in the cloud, so it basically thinks the cloud is their life, and it's computerized, and then eventually they start communicating with the outside world, with us, and they become this sentient being, and they're this community intelligence. As we talked about that earlier, they don't have this definition of individuality. They solve that problem differently. Again, it's fiction, but it's really beautiful how it comes out and how it helps humanity achieve their goals. It becomes like just this different kind of sentient being that is just very different than what we've ever seen before. And I love it because they meet their creator. I want to. If you don't, I think we're genetically selected to definitely have this instinct to meet our creator. It's something that lives inside us, and it's like free will. The people who had that got it more ahead in life and had more children, or were more interested in advancing society, and so it became the standard repertoire of our behavior. And as more as we encourage that behavior, I think as more crazy and interesting discoveries we will make. Will we ever meet the creator? I don't know. It might take a long, long time. Who knows?
Yeah, who knows?
It's the journey that's the destination, right?
Exactly. So I guess this is where I just came online actually from these thoughts, and then I just thought, okay, so what if we only live once, and what if everything that we can take with us after we die is what we have given away? How can I give the most away in my life? That's basically what it made me think about. And then I, of course, stumbled over effective altruism that again, I think it started off in Oxford, where you basically think if you only have 80,000 hours of work in your life, how can you spend those 80,000 hours the best? And I've been asking myself that question a lot, and that is what made me come up with the game that I have developed to take the world through the technology tree and into the singularity and beyond.
When we talk about altruism, it's certainly something that is in our hive mind that we've been as a human civilization, is an incredibly powerful, useful, and in the end, not just for the society, also for the individual, strangely enough, a positive behavior. Like it's not a zero-sum game, human civilization, because of all, that's kind of the unique insight of the creator, or evolution, wherever we want to go with this. Yeah. Where do you see the guidelines? Maybe it's something we can look into further in, maybe there's a book or there's a way you've been inspired. Where is the GPS to figure out, should we be more altruistic in a certain situation, in a certain life environment, or should we be more competitive, so to speak, and not altruistic? Where do we go? Where is our GPS, and where do you feel we err maybe in the current situation?
Yeah. So this is one of the questions that it's a science. It's a whole science of effective altruism. They basically come up with the same answer that you allude to now, that you just do so much better for the world if you are a Bill Gates than if you are a volunteer in a tribe in Africa your whole life. Because if you're Bill Gates, then you just get rich, and then you just give away so much more.
But he was not altruistic for the first 50 years of his life. He was the complete opposite. He was an evil capitalist, so to speak. I don't think capitalism is evil, but let's just use this picture. And then he turned around and said, oh, I give it away, and now, I don't want to take all these billions to my grave. And I don't even know if he's completely altruistic right now. He kind of makes it sound that way, but maybe it's just a PR story.
Yes. I am fascinated with Stoicism, Torsten. And Stoicism is all about impact. So the intention is not so important. It's basically what kind of impact do you place on the world. So maybe you can make a case for Bill Gates overall having done more evil than good in his life, depends on how you interpret Windows. I certainly agree with you that it wasn't an evil thing as such. It's a great tool also, even though I'm a Mac user. But
That
he
seems to be an
stole many
internal
of the
divide.
design.
But it certainly increased productivity worldwide. I mean, I think we all can agree on this. There might have been an even better solution, but that's the one that people chose for whatever reason.
Yeah, and yeah, so and this is also then where I became interested in gamification, because if it's all about impact and you don't really have to think about intention, then the real question is how do you get people to collaborate in a way where they just together make the biggest impact? Maybe for selfish reasons, that's great. Let's just assume that altruism doesn't exist. I actually don't really think that altruism exists. I mean, a mother saving her child and giving her away in the process is, yeah, maybe it's altruistic, maybe it's selfish, maybe it's a part, maybe it's all just biological. But the point, but the thing that I became interested in is if you can gamify actions, and if you can make a roadmap. You ask about the GPS. You can make a roadmap for good. And when you say good, I mean, sci-fis have been thinking a lot about this. What is good actually? Is it good to just advance technology to the point where you have an AI that makes paper clips? Or is it good to, like, there's so many pitfalls. So I have been extremely cautious when I made my technology tree to just really dial it back and say, as long as it contributes to increasing sentience in any of these four ways, then it just cannot be described as evil. As long as you bite into the assumption that a universe is infinitely more interesting when it is sentient than when it is not sentient. So, and from there, I just became interested in crowdsourcing and how to like open source, how awesome that is. And I know you also talked about that with your other guest, Daniel Gross, about how gamification and how open source can just bring out something in people, and you don't have to call it altruism. But when you remove money, people suddenly are open to become creative, and people want to be creative. And actually,
But do you remove money? Because that's kind of my quandary with open source. Yes, we think it's just altruism, and for some people it might be, right? But in the end, you have to see how you allocate your time, and you do allocate your time and use open source as a way to scale your fame. It's a great tool for this. Like, it's like a best PR tool ever for developers. They won't do so well, most introverts on Twitter, but they will do very well on GitHub if they release working on an interesting project, and people will see that and will recognize it. So again, I don't think, and I find that's really interesting, as you say, well, altruism is actually, might not actually be true. It is selfishness that kind of masquerades as altruism to an extent, because we in the end, and that's kind of my baseline picture on the world, is all about productivity growth. It's making more with less. And that abundifies everything. And this is the history of the world, where it's a history of technology. If we come up with a way to increase productivity growth, it's all solved. And this is what we're doing with the Singularity, with all these technologies. They make us more effective. We can do things that seem to be like extending the lifespan, seems to be altruistic. But Aubrey Graham told me this. He's like, dude, aging is, and you said that earlier with the Library of Alexandria, it's not just the problem that we want to live forever. It is we train all these brains for all this time, until their 60s and 70s, and then we just let them go to waste. Why don't we just change it and make them work for 500 years or 1,000 years? It would be much more cost efficient. And again, selfishness, right? So we make more tax money from these older populations. And maybe that is kind of the description of the universe, right? So it is productivity growth, and we will have to really be focused on it. I don't think it gets any real debate out there running Real Focus. We have Peter Thiel, who used that. I think that's been a bunch of white papers before that the really worrying sign about the last 50 years is the productivity growth isn't where we wanted it to be coming out of the 50s, 60s, and early 70s. Do you think we will reverse back to the mean, and once all these technologies come online, we will see an amazing productivity growth in real GDP, adopt the statistics? And B, where do you think this will happen the most? Will developed economies do the best, or will developing economies that did the best in the last 30 years because productivity growth in developed economies wasn't that interesting? Where do you see the biggest impact? So if you're an investor, where would you put your money right now?
Yeah, great question, Torsten. I think that we have to think about what I call mission learning now. I think that when we talk about 21st century learning, it is not the institutional learning that was invented to create workers for the Industrial Revolution. Sit still from 9 to 5, do what the teachers say, think within the frames that you are given, don't riot, don't think too creatively. This is an institutional kind of learning that belongs to the 19th century, maybe a bit the 20th century. But when we think about the 21st century, we really have to go to a mission learning concept. And
I
this is
fully agree. Yes.
Yeah, and the studies here is that we learn best when we set ourselves a mission, and then we go about, we go towards our goal, and then we reach a barrier, we get in just in time resources, and then we try to overcome our fail forward basically. And this is what will make us learn the fastest. And the reason why I talk about learning now is that productivity is, I think productivity is also a 20th century concept when we talk about human labor. As computers and robots become more and more sophisticated, then the more logical part, the repetitive part or mechanical part of work will be taken over by machines, which is productivity. That leaves us with a more narrow window of creativity, which is the workspace that we can have, the future of work. And creativity is a lot about having free time. You can't be creative. I challenge you to be creative if you are time constrained. Somehow the good ideas come when you are in the shower or you're falling asleep, or when you block out 3 hours of your day to just space out. I think this is also what Thomas Edison did, or Picasso. I think Thomas Edison, he kind of power napped. He fell asleep and he had keys in his hand, and the moment he dropped his keys, then he kind of woke up from his slumber with the new ideas. I think creativity...
It's a great tale to tell.
Yes.
It's like Newton under the apple tree, which apparently isn't true. That's what Safar told me. Who knows? Who knows? She knows way better. She wrote a whole book about Newton.
Yeah. Growth. So I think productivity will happen because there will be machines to do it. But creativity is the real workspace that we should invest in. We should invest our own time. We should invest in others' time in being creative. I think the people who know how to be creative will be the future. If it's the developing countries, maybe it is. If it's the developed countries, maybe it is. I don't know.
Yeah, I have this suspicion. I'm fully with you. Creativity is what we should focus on, but it's so hard to define. It's so hard to learn creativity. Psychologists have big trouble even describing it. There's very difficult words. And as you say, we don't know how to trigger it. We don't know, will it happen for the next 10 years? Will I have any ideas? And then there's this geniuses who have like crazy good ideas every single year and write great books. and then they're done. And then the next 30 years is nothing. And you're like, how is that possible, right? And they say, well, there's nothing there. I mean, I tried, but nothing happened.
That's true.
So
But
it's
I think that they
unpleasant.
have, what they do is that they do have an idea of what it isn't. It is, creativity is not sitting in a school. Like if you go take a child for a walk in the park, and then just listen to what the child says. He will ask you, why is the leaves green? Why are we walking on two legs? He will ask you so many interesting questions. And then take a 15-year-old for a walk who have been through 10 years of schooling. The questions that the 15-year-old will ask will be less interesting. I'm sorry to say, but that's how I feel that the institution.
No, you're right. You're right, but you need a certain set of skills, routines, applied knowledge, abstract knowledge to live in the current world. Now, this might change, and we definitely are going towards more creativity, but you need those skills. And I see this with my teenagers. They're just on this cusp of where are they? Are we children or are we like grown-ups? And you need the grown-up skills to as well. I mean, we kind of see that as a given because we are too short on creativity right now, but we need both. And I think what's fascinating is we have this longer takeoff time, that the 20s, 30s used to be productive times where you already had a job, and in 25 you would start your job. That's not true anymore. You know, you can dingle dangle until your 50s and you will still be fine, which is very cool. I mean, I'm really jealous of this. I mean, I also dingle dangle, so I like that. When we think about this, the way we design our future, is there something, and there's probably lots of policy advice that you would give, but if you had like the top 3 options to change current public policy, maybe you feel like public policy doesn't matter so much. That's kind of what I feel. I'm like, well, whatever. You know, do whatever you want. It doesn't change any of these graphs. It doesn't change Moore's law. It doesn't change productivity growth much. It doesn't, maybe there's a little bit of regulation we can do, but in the end, it's driven by public policy. There is only so much you can do as a policymaker. But when you look at policymakers, if you would talk to the president, what would be your top 3 of suggestions what we should change in current public policy for the next 10 years?
Okay, wow, that's a good question too. So institutions, definitely that's a big thing. Go towards more machine learning. I strongly encourage that. Try to give people reasons to learn rather than frameworks to learn, because as it is now, there's so much just-in-time knowledge everywhere that you just need. I think I can't remember who called it a grandmother. You just need a grandmother, basically, one who stands beside you and encourage you. She doesn't have to understand everything you do, but just guides you through your emotions a bit as you fail and stand up again. That is
we need some wisdom, right?
Yeah. Well, wisdom. That's not what is meant by grandmother in this sense. In this sense, maybe you can call it emotional wisdom, where you just you can fall, and then you have to have someone to say, "What do you do when you fall down? You get back up again." That is a kind of an emotional wisdom that is what I really believe that is what we should teach children. But that's of course not institutions and policy as you ask for. Another aspect that I really call for in policy is AI research, because this is an aspect that is under researched and could have a very, very big impact, as I'm sure you agree. So and private companies, they only have so much free time to research this. And if it is such a big, if it's going to have such a big impact, if we are just going to be the bootloaders, then, but if we at least get to invent it, then we could have a bit of a dent in the universe in trying to invent something good instead. And I think this is the same thing that Peter Diamandis, great hero of mine, is saying when he says that if we are the first, if we are the first civilization to become a cross a multiplanetary species, then this is the moment in time where we actually are reaching the stars, and that means that the culture that we have now is what we will start to expand to other planets, from where the cultures will evolve later, but they will then evolve from this mother culture that we have now. So we kind of have, if we are going multiplanetary within the next 200 years, we really have a responsibility to create a set of values that are so sound that they are worth being a mother culture for a multiplanetary civilization with less communication, with less intercommunication. It all dials back.
Kind of what the British did for the rest of the world, right? I feel that's a role that the British, by accident, probably, because they were the dominating power when a lot of these places were populated, like the US or Australia. They had a major impact, and they went different routes, but it's so easy to trace back to those roots, right? So when you go to Singapore or Hong Kong, you know immediately, not just by its common language, but you know there's a lot of British heritage, and you know also where it ends, and where there's a different culture that has been swept in over time. That's really fascinating to me. I mean, I grew up in Germany, which doesn't really have that culture. It didn't really have that impact on the world, for good reasons, probably. but the British had this jump start in making places so much more productive, and then just dropping them out of the system, and they were fine. And that's pretty amazing to me. I mean, there's a Commonwealth, but I don't think it has that much of an impact in day-to-day decisions.
Yeah, I mean, okay, you can argue both for and against the British. The dissemination of the British culture. It is what it is, but at least with multiplanetary.
But it's not just the British culture, right? So it transformed into something different, and that's pretty cool. Like, it gave a lot of freedom to develop something else, and that's different. It's like in the Portuguese colony. That would be a similar example. A very different experience, or in a Spanish colony. They're just not on. It went a different life. It's more top down. It's more like we tell you what to do, and they didn't really encourage this bubbling up. Now, you can argue both ways, and maybe the British had other faults. 100%. I don't want to get into colonialism, but I'm just saying it gave this, seemingly, to my understanding, a really good mix of freedom and also a great quality that the British brought with them. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. That's what I'm trying to say in many places, and from my experience.
From that point of view, I totally agree with you. Of course, multiplanetary dissemination is less. I mean, there will probably not be other alien cultures around our solar system. So in that way, I guess it's going to be a little bit more friendly in that way. But yeah, exactly. If we then the British, they just knew their mother culture had such a big influence, and if we can have the same influence on the solar system, wow, what a responsibility. So governments have a responsibility, and they should then talk together to find a solution to that. Because I think going to space is, you can maybe compare it with the Irish going to the United States, and the Spanish going to the United States and South America, creating subcultures. Maybe that's what's going to happen. I kind of prefer that it is more coordinated, that they will be more thought through than just, we happen to have the Spanish mindset, we happen to have the Irish mindset, but just let's try to define now in governmental level what are good values that are worth spreading out.
That's really
going into religion.
I love how you say that. I think that's a point that most people, there isn't enough understanding, and I think this is obviously being solved right now with the internet. There is this immediate default, especially in a time of crisis, to go back to, say, nationalistic values and patriotism, because it's just what you know, and it makes you comfortable. But you don't spend enough time to really do comparative analysis of what's working in other places. And sometimes I feel like it's what the internet, at least lately, hasn't really helped, right? So people go into these rabbit holes and they stay there for like a year, and they don't even want to hear anything else. They go into these echo chambers and they feel comfortable. And for them, it's really difficult for a lot of, and I see this in San Francisco a lot, it's really difficult to get out of this rabbit hole. And then they're out of it. And then they're like, oh, I don't even remember what I thought a year ago.
Yeah.
And now I have a completely different opinion. That makes things really difficult, like a rational analysis of what long-term impact of policy and moral decisions. It could happen, but I don't think we're there yet. I think we're just waking up and making this active decision. But before, we just adopted what we knew, right? What was for some reason comfortable to us. But very few people went around the world, said, okay, this is what I've seen, this is what I recommend. And then it was actually implemented. That happened, but it's a rarity in the past. And hopefully that changes now, as you say. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I agree. So those would be the things that I would recommend to any given president or prime minister.
Well, Peter, I hope they're going to listen to you. I want to thank you for coming on the podcast. This was awesome. I learned so much, and I think you're really bright mind, and you're onto something there. And I really hope there is more positivity in what this singularity that sounds scary at first glance will really become in the public's eye. And I think you do a great job actually helping people to get to a more positive understanding.
Thank you, Torsten, and it's my honor to be here.
Absolutely. I hope we get to do this again.
Yeah, let's do it.
Talk soon.
Talk soon.
Take it easy. Until then, bye-bye.
All right, bye.